races, backgrounds, ages, religions, sexual orientation. Does that make for better creativity? Absolutely.
So, Brent, you're a very accomplished leader who has built, nurtured, and mentored high-performance team for over 2 decades now. And you've held super amazing and influential positions in Canada and in the US, where your skill set has taken some of the most ambitious and challenging brands to great success as well, including Budweiser, Mercedes-Benz, Nestle, and HSBC, which is a cracking portfolio to have. And last year, you and your partners, Karen and John, founded your own agency, Giza, repping the brand with your T-shirt. I love it.
Yeah.
And that was born from so many fascinating insights. The one that I've really hung on to was that fewer than 5% of ad employees are over 50, which is a really shocking number, especially when you imagine possibly a lot of those aren't in the creative team, actually. How do you respond to that statistic?
It's insanity. I always say, just to, have some fun with it, the only industries, there's only 2 industries I can think of that are guiltier than advertising for ageism, and it's supermodels and Hollywood, right? I mean, really, when you think about it, it's really a shame. It comes from a flawed business model, really, and it's unfortunate, because this wasn't the way it always was. I mean, you used to walk into ad agencies, back in the heyday, and you had a lot of experienced various generations of people in a creative department, in the account department. You had a lot of white hair in the executive suites, and even that's not prevalent nowadays. So it's an issue that the industry, without going down a rabbit hole, has, in order to make its numbers work as public companies that are accountable to shareholders, they've had to let go of the most experienced people. Why? Because they're the most expensive people. I mean,
Yeah.
it just really is what it is. And now we're left with an industry that is too young, too inexperienced, and too underserved as young creative or middle-aged creative people. That, we grew up in the world of mentorship. Like, you learned your craft from the masters. I mean, and if you look at everywhere else in the world, this doesn't exist. I mean, who do you want doing your surgery, right? Somebody that's done 17,000 surgeries or 7, right? Who's a better bricklayer? Somebody that's been doing it for 40 years or 4 weeks? I mean, mastery is just a thing that comes with time. So it's a shame. But yeah, that's not the whole reason, but that's definitely part of the reason that we launched Giza.
It's a really fascinating kind of launch story from your perspective, but it's really interesting as well when you zoom out and look at society as a whole, that this 50-plus demographic is being ignored and people are kind of obsessing over Gen Z and sort of panicking almost in their reaction to that generation, when you think that 70% of the total US disposable income is controlled by those over 50s as well. Is that something that really drove your position to start Giza?
Well, that was the second part. I mean, I've had the benefit of being a CMO as well for a company, and I have a lot of empathy for that job now, because finding growth is hard. But it's like the elephant in the room. We have these old behaviors that are youth, or the fallacy that you have to get them young because it's a lifetime value of a client. And if I get them when they're 24, and when I get them when they're 18, they're going to be a client when they're 60. And that's old school. That's old marketing. Like, that doesn't work anymore. We need to start marketing to this cohort. I mean, they're 30% of the population. They're forecast to grow at 30% over the next, 2 or 3 decades. 8.3 trillion in spending power. And in 6 years, only 6 years, this is shocking if you want to, you might even start to feel old. Millennials start to turn 50, right?
Wow.
And that 8.3 trillion is forecast to go to 12.6 trillion when the millennials are all turning 50. So it's kind of like behaviors in the client side of the business, and CMOs and VPs and directors. It's hard to get off the crack, right? You've always gone after, think of my background, Budweiser, right? You've always gone after in this country, the 19 to 25-year-old, 19 to 25. So to possibly go, I'm going to shift gears and go after a 50 plus is scary, because what if it doesn't work? But that's also not part of our thesis and what we're suggesting. What we're suggesting is that you carve off a certain amount of budget and you start going after, I mean, you think you've turned every rock over as a CMO to find growth. The pressures on CMOs to find it. Well, there's a big rock sitting right in front of you. And if
Yeah.
you just lift it up and entertain it, you're going to start to grow your market, right? And now, I mean, you're starting to see the data that's popping up everywhere that's saying like, it's not just us that figured this out. We're not that smart, right?
Well, you clearly are, because you've launched in with great success already with Geezer. And I wanted to ask you, why was it the right time for you to start your own agency? And for how long had this differentiator around age been on your radar? Was it a eureka moment or something that you've been thinking about for a long time?
Yeah, it was, oh God, when's the right time to do anything, right? This idea came from Karen, Karen McKinley, one of the partners, and she had reached out to John Kieselhorst, and both of them had worked together at a agency that was supported by Alex Bogusky and a lot of the old Crispin Porter and Bogusky people, called MAID, and they met. And then when that wrapped up, they, of course, had worked together and were really close as two creatives. And Karen had this idea, and she'd mulled it around for many, many years. And I had just started about 6 months prior to meeting Karen. I was thinking about it from a slightly different angle than she was, but her and John connected, and then I ended up connecting with them, and we just came to this kind of dating period of getting to know one another and getting after it. But then the timing just started to feel right. We started to see the articles from research companies like Civic Science popping up and saying, guys, this like your growth is right in front of you. It shouldn't be like, what else should we be doing to go after Gen Z? It should be, no, you should be going after boomers and Gen X, because they have all the money, they have all the wealth, they own homes, right? And so that timing started to feel right. And then this year and the past few years, but predominantly this year, we saw consolidation in the ad business like we've never seen, which
Yeah.
has just put the most talented, exceptional people on the street. I mean, agencies that consolidated from 5 nameplates to 1. That's great. They got rid of 4 CEOs. They got rid of, probably about 20 SVPs, 30 VPs, right? Executive creative directors. Now we have 1 instead of 4. And that's the race to the bottom that has created the groundswell for the opportunity. These are exceptionally talented people that have decorated careers, but they just happen to be a big line item, right?
It's a really good point. So, would you say that there is a peak age for working in advertising right now? And is that, in fact, younger, where there's more job opportunity by the sound of things?
I mean, God, there's 19 answers to that question, right? If I'm a peak age, I mean, I feel like people are starting to get aged out in their 40s. And, now we've got, and it's not their fault. So to be clear, this organization is not against youthful talent in advertising. Fully support that. I actually feel bad for them because they don't have what I mentioned earlier, that mentorship to really, really get after their craft. Like, I reference, if you haven't seen the documentary, Hero Dreams of Sushi, about the painstaking process to
Yeah.
go through to become a master sushi chef. I mean, that's mastery. And it's not their fault, but we've got like 34-year-old executive creative directors of agencies. And I'm like, no. Like, and it's not their fault. That's why I have empathy for them too, because I'm like, you feel like you're amazing, you're in the big chair, but the evidence is, and this is me being very critical of the industry, the work's not very good, right? I don't expect to be very impressed on Sunday, right? Watching a Super Bowl again. It's become monster amounts of money spent on celebrities, but the insights and the ideas just aren't great, right? You just don't see it that much anymore. So peak age for opportunity, I don't know. I mean, this business is fantastic on 20 and 30-year-olds because you can bounce around, you can make a lot of money, you can go to if you're talented, you can go to the agencies like, the anomalies and the Crispin Porters that are back in their heyday and when the present day, like Wyden Kennedy, like you can move around and make some good money quickly. But then you wake up one day and you're like, oh, wait, where did everybody my age go? Right?
It's one thing looking at, obviously, the compensation for doing a great job and the salaries and the job titles and that sort of thing. But as you said, the creative output, as you mentioned there, isn't what it was. But that's a really tricky thing, I feel, to take into your 50s, for your 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever, because you have so many responsibilities on you. You're almost weighed down by having a lifestyle that needs a certain salary, for example. You have a lot of people dependent on you. How how the hell are you meant to stay up to date, current, always on, super creative, super high achieving? Like how do you do that?
I don't know if this is true because I can only speak for my own experience, but I think it's innately if you're an ad person. I mean, I was a client and don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for having been a client. It taught me so much, but at some point you look around the room and you're like, these aren't my people. I think ad people just innately are curious people. And that's another ageism problem is they're like, "Oh, well, they're not into technology and they're not gonna learn AI." And it's like, we're early adopters just like anybody else is. And, I play around with more AI and things that I had no business playing around. I think that comes with if you're a real ad person, right? And I used to be able to see a person that would come into the ad business and, it would be like, I don't think they're gonna work out." Like, you could just feel it. So I think staying current, it's just always been part of the business to be up on what everybody's doing. And, you're going to hear everybody, they already are. What am I talking about? That's one of the other things I hate about this business is that all the Super Bowl ads are out and I've had
Mm.
to avoid them because I enjoy consuming them with the game. Call me old fashioned. That's my geezerness. Right. But I think that, we all stay current with who's doing what, who's moving where, what technology is out, what are the CEOs talking about. So I think it's just nature. And then if you're a person that's, I don't want to call it lazy, but if you're a little slow to get to the batter's box, I'd say that you're influenced from your peers. And that's something that might have been lost in the pandemic that, when you'd walk by a creative team or a strategy team or an account team all talking about something that you weren't aware of, or when 8 years ago, data science was the thing. Everybody had to, "What? What? Data science? I don't know data science." Like, talk to me, right? I think it's just kind of in our blood.
And you mentioned, speaking of that kind of in your blood thing, and you can tell when someone's a true ad person. What skills or qualities or behaviors are really important in advertising today, regardless of age?
I mentioned this word before. It's curiosity. It's the need to create. You are a creative. Even if you're on the business side, you've got to be creative to survive or to do really well in this business. You don't see people making it past, account directors if they're not innately creative. Yeah, like, you have to be curious, you have to wanna create something, and you know what? You have to wanna do something that nobody else has done, right? That's another thing that I'm seeing a lot of right now in the business is I'm like, that looks awful familiar. That looks awful familiar too. Oh, that was an '80s ad of blah, 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 I remember." And, you're seeing a lot of that right now, and I think that was, maybe it's not a generational thing, but our generation, you'd be riffing on an idea and some creative person, 12 feet away would overhear you and go, "It's been done. Moving on, next idea," as opposed to, "Well, I think we could still make it work." Like, it's not too similar, right?
That's a really interesting tension there, isn't it? Because I feel when I've had this conversation a few times now, and often people see naivety as a real strength in young creatives, but perhaps that's at odds with this seen it before that you need to avoid in advertising.
Yeah, there's a role for being naive for sure. But yeah, it doesn't rise to the top very quickly, right? But there's always that naive, I'll call it an insight that comes out of, a conversation in those capacities. It sometimes is like, I would have never thought of that, right? And that's where youth has a role, but that's where everybody has a role,
Yeah.
right? Everybody has a cohort of insight, and that's what's been lost, right? Like, My partner Karen says it so eloquently. If you want to understand a menopausal woman at 53, you probably don't want to ask a 28-year-old man, right? And that's what's happening, right? You've got products out there, and the ad business has become too generalist, and it's the business of the business that's driven it that way, right?
Mm. Well, let's talk about that collaboration then, because obviously, in your career, you have managed vast teams and lots of different people. How does generational diversity impact creativity? Is it a good thing, or actually should you be more niche per brief, the people you're putting on the job?
It depends on the brief, right? But to speak en masse is a mix of, races, backgrounds, ages, religions, beliefs, sexual orientation. Does that make for better creativity? Absolutely. Because all of those individuals will look at the exact same thing and have an exact different thing to say about it, right? It's insight. That's where experience. I mean, a 21-year-old will have a different experience with Cadillac than a 55-year-old, right? And that doesn't mean anybody's right or wrong, but that usually gets to, did you think about? No, I didn't think about that because I don't have the capacity to. Now, when I jump to what we're doing with Geezer, we've decided that the best people to speak to the insights and ideate around those insights and to understand the business of the business with chasing a 50-year-old is best served with those in the cohort. And that's where we're trying to become a specialized agency in a generalist market. And you'll say it's not new, right? I mean, in America, I remember being an anomaly, years ago, over a decade ago. And it was like, guys, we should probably have an Hispanic department,
Mhm.
right? Because the 435 Caucasian guys probably aren't the best to work on this brief. Speaking to an Hispanic population that have 3.4 children as opposed to zero point 0.4 children, it's just
Yeah.
kind of the simplicity of the idea is the magic of it. It's just is what it is. You probably shouldn't try to be generalists anymore.
Yeah, it makes sense. And speaking of what you offer at Geezer, I know that you promise your clients that your creative teams will have at least someone of 25 years experience behind them. Why is 25 the magic number?
I don't know that it is. The number was come to because it was just an arbitrary, not really arbitrary. I mean, 25 years of doing anything, and we assume that these people started in their early 20s to mid 20s. So that puts you in and around the 50 plus cohort. So that's kind of like we picked as the mastery, and because the segment is being defined as 50 plus, we were like, we might as well align ourselves with that notion and just get after the problems with that. So, but was it a magic number that had, some really intellectual rationale behind it? No.
I've learned to expect that from you, you see.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
No, that's good stuff. Brent, have you ever felt too old or too young for the job that you were doing at that time?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you feel too young because you're insecure and you're in a I remember getting my first real big job outside I'm Canadian, in downtown Toronto at Saatchi& Saatchi on the Toyota business, and you walked into a room and your insecurity with feeling like, "Oh my god, I'm in the big leagues now," leads you to feel too young, and then I think when it's weird, it happens really quietly where all of a sudden you feel too old. You
Hmm.
know, a friend of mine's father said, "When you look around and the fashion is stupid, you're
Oh, God,
getting
I'm
old."
old.
Or when the acronyms, you're like, "Wait a second, when did this happen?" And then I think there's, like I said, in this business, unfortunately, it's created an insecurity, and I have a lot of peers that are still in the big agencies that are like, "Any moment now, I'm gonna get picked off." So I think that creates an insecurity on the other end, that is really unfortunate, and how you deal with it is you're either comfortable in your own skin and can push through it or you can't. If you're young, You raise your hand, you throw out ideas, you have a most senior person in the room look at you like that was the dumbest thing they ever heard, and you're just okay with it, right? And you're gonna earn your ability to have more of those conversations. And I think on the flip side, it's again back to curiosity. As I started to get into my 40s and, be working with a bunch of 20-year-olds, one, it's a great benefit because there's nothing better than feeling young all the time because
Yeah.
there's youth around you. But then it's the same thing. You need to be comfortable in your own skin to question, to ask, to not try to pretend like you know everything because you're old, right?
Yeah.
To be like, "What'd you say? Talk me through that. I don't know what that means." Like, I got shocked. My earliest feel old moment was I asked a couple people that I was working with, young people, like, "How was your weekend?" It was the best weekend ever, Brent. I can't tell you, like, it was so great, and I'm like, "Oh my god, what did you get up to?" I put my PJs on, and I watched Netflix all weekend and didn't leave the couch, okay? I didn't grow up that way. I grew up that you did a pre-drink at somebody's house, you went out to a club, you went out to an after-hours club, you
Yeah.
came back to somebody's house, and that was but instead of judging, it was like, "Talk to me about this," right? Your generation is different than my generation. Talk about what that how that makes you feel great, whereas I'm looking at you like, "What do you mean that's a great weekend? That's a terrible weekend."
Well, there's
Right?
that healthy curiosity, right? You want to lean in and you want to learn, but there is an issue of people dealing with and collaborating with others in a team. So 17% of people don't even know how to approach someone in a different generation to them in the workplace. It can be intimidating, you can feel a bit unsure about it. What advice would you give to kind of nurture a healthy environment where people feel really valued and listened to and can collaborate healthily?
Yeah, you know what? That starts at the top. Like, an organization, you can feel a company from their lobby,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that all starts with leadership because they had a hand in who's sitting at that desk, if anybody is at that desk anymore, right? What does it look like when you look around through the glass offices? Are there glass offices, right? Are there offices? I've been a part of elevator doors opening to agencies, and I thought I was on a trading floor of a stock exchange. There was so much energy. But what leadership needs to do is, like you said, if you're my age and you're a CEO, you have to have that curious, frantic, well, like need to just do great things and energy that transcends all of those tropes and makes it safe. If you come up with a horrible idea, I've seen executive creative directors berate and yell at people like, "This is awful. You're terrible. Like, how did you even you can't even do that anymore because you get arrested and be on the street." But I grew up in the era where that was very prevalent, right? It was you ruled with an iron fist and CEOs and ECDs did. Let's just call it what it is. Gen Xers were a different generation, right? We were hard because we were made hard. That doesn't mean it's right. We're not gonna change Gen Z and Alpha and Beta into Gen X. It's not gonna happen. So you need to create an environment that works on everybody's terms. And you know what? Gen X likes being being treated well as too. We didn't like being yelled at more than anyone did, but it was just a different time.
Yeah, really good point. Tell me about the geezer lobby then. If we say that the lobby is really telling of an agency, what in your mind does it feel like? What does it look like?
I'll look forward to having a lobby. What would that look like? We talked about that it might be like a speakeasy, right?
Oh, I
So
love that.
you might walk into what you think is like a pop-up retro store of skateboards and BMX bikes and memorabilia from an era gone by, only to be received from, an instruction of a secret knock that then lets you into the back of it, and that would be the dream, and then, like I said, I'd like that energetic environment that is wide open, and I don't want an office. I wanna sit with everybody,
Yeah.
if I've had the benefit of shooting a lot of spots with celebrities, and some of them are terrible, deplorable human beings, and you didn't want them to be, and other ones that you would think they're allowed to be, were the nicest people that sat with the crew at lunch instead of going to their production trailer. Like, that's the kind of environment I want, like, soft seating everywhere, retro couches, and just play to the environment creatively. I mean, unlike a lot of agencies, not to pat ourselves on the back, but this is evidence of it. We treated our brand as our first client.
Yeah.
Agencies aren't particularly great at branding themselves or at carving out a niche. They're kind of like all things to all people, depending on how much money you have. And it grew up in the era of three people's names or initials, right? BBDO, JWT, YNR. Like they carved out their own unique ways at it, but it's different now.
I love that. And if you can please have your lobby ready by May when I'm in New York,
Yeah. Oh,
I'm
you're going
coming
in
to the
January.
speakeasy.
Yeah, yeah. I think it'd be fantastic just to walk by, and actually, you might even just make it a legit store. Like we sell our swag,
Oh, do
right?
you? I love that.
Yeah.
Amazing. So we've spoken a lot about collaboration, and mastery and kind of time served, but what unique qualities does your generation have to bring to creativity? Not just that mastery and that time that you've spent crafting your skills, but what sort of core behaviors and approach does your generation have?
Oh, wow, that's a big loaded question. I mean, because I'll comment on it, but I don't want you to think that I mean that the other generations don't have it, because I can't comment on their generation. But our generation were workhorses, and I know that it's dating me, but I mean, we grew up in the era where everybody, I mean, agencies even knew it. If you stayed after 8 p.m., you were able to expense your dinner,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So, I remember walking by with a CEO friend of mine. I was walking by one of the offices I worked at in Manhattan, and I was explaining this to him that, like, at any given point, that agency's full of people right now working, and it was like a Saturday afternoon. He's like, "Come on." I'm like, "It absolutely is." And I've said, "Come on, let's go." So I swiped my card, went up, walked through the creative floor, and there's like 30 people working. So that was a generational thing. It was competitive, right? We were competitive people with each other. We didn't want to lose out to the great idea. We didn't want to lose the promotion to the account supervisor from an AE. Like, we wanted to impress the ECD the most. We wanted to have the most ideas on the wall, like, it was just a different competitiveness and time. And like I said, I'm not suggesting it's right,
Yeah.
but for us, it was right. I mean, pulling all-nighters, like, even as a senior executive, I would say, like, maybe 4 a year, where I'd come home to my wife's blow dryer screaming, pass her into the shower, walk right back out, put a blazer on and boots and jeans and go to a pitch. Weekends, normal. That's why agencies have not only entertainment, but they're building, like, I don't know if they're still doing it because of the implication, but most of the agencies I worked at had, like, the nicest bars in them. Like,
Yeah.
free alcohol all day, 24/7, like, not unlocked at 5 p.m. You'd see somebody walk by with a pint of Budweiser at 3 p.m. going to start jamming in a creative idea, and those that was the trickery to keep you in the office. If in Manhattan, where 4 young people are living in a one-bedroom apartment with a pull-out couch and bunk beds, they can come here and have a pint of beer for free and work.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard, hairdressers, dentists on site, gyms on site, anything to keep you there.
So our generation, I guess we still look at that and we don't frown on that. We're like, "Oh, remember how great those days were when I'd have to call my buddy when I used to commute into downtown Toronto, I'd have to call my friend of mine at like 10 o'clock, go, 'Hey, can I crash on your couch?'" Like, I had like a bag with a change of clothes because I knew that on any given week that I was not going home every night. There was no way. Right? It just didn't happen. So, and then I think it's just like, and I'm not suggesting that other people don't have it, but it was a tenacious appetite for doing something that had never been done before, like shooting for the stars legitimately.
Clearly, the ad landscape is very different now to what it was then, probably for the better in a lot of ways. But let's talk about the industry now and how people over 50, like you said, perhaps need to work a little bit harder to cut through and keep their space at the table. What advice would you give to people over 50, perhaps who can't start their own agency, but want to keep kind of creatively in tune and keep their progress in their career?
I think the fact that they have to do something to stay current is probably a fallacy. I think we have the predisposition. Again, it's our society. It's not, this isn't even advertised. We have a belief that people over 50 aren't with it, that they have to work harder to get it. And what I just told you, everything about Gen X and boomers, the way that they get after work with this tenacious appetite and are workhorses, they're probably more current than most young people that prioritize yoga class at 5 o'clock. These people are going home and they're sweating the details. So I think that's a perception problem.
Mhm.
And that perception problem has manifested itself into the reason, one of the reasons that, gets us really excited is that, there's still ads out there that show a 50 or 60-year-old woman, but she has short gray hair and is in a garden. No, like that's a misrepresentation of the
Yeah.
cohort, right? Like 50-year-olds, I go to the gym and lift weights every day. I run, 5 miles a day. Like our generation is not the boomer generation or the one, that came from our parents. We're with it and we're misrepresented in creative. So, but to circle back to your question, I think that because there's a perception doesn't mean you can ignore it. I think that then the role of the creative person to establish themselves as with it and current, it all comes down to what they present first and how they present it. Like when the world went digital, I remember, right? That was the era of, guys, can we stop leading off with the 60-second cinema ad? Because the perception of the client is the last thing you got to was social media,
Yeah.
right? And then the thing after that was media. Then the media team went and there was never enough time left in the room. I always used to feel so bad for media people, right? It was, the importance was this elaborate TV production that was going to be in a cinema, and there was going to be a cut down to 30-second ads and then 15s in, well, that was a perception problem. So if I'm a creative today, I'm probably going in with the social solution, whether or not there's a role for AI in any of the work that you're going to be presenting or to help facilitate more insights. Then the last thing I might talk about is a production of some sort in whether it's print or, film, because I do believe they're all on top of it. You have to be, right? You just can't
Yeah.
play at the sport if you're not.
Yeah, I think it's a lazy perception to imagine that older people aren't in touch with tech
Yeah.
or
It's easy. It's just
yeah,
it's not their fault. It's hey, we have an order of things we do because they're habitual. It's because they're learned. It's because they're taught. And we're taught in our society, and I'm hopeful that it's going to start going away, that this is what a 55-year-old man looks like. Whereas I look to like Men's Health magazine to go, thank you, right? Or like, you go out with certain people are really fighting hard against it. And I appreciate that.
yeah. I was really interested the other day when I think I saw your LinkedIn post that had a list of categories and sectors that were specific to the over 50s that weren't being spoken about or utilized like they should be.
Yeah. And you could have went on and on. It was funny when I hadn't seen that post before it went out, and of course I get it and then repost it, and I called Karen, my partner and writer. I was like, "How long did that take you?" And she goes, "Long, really long."
It was
But
just brilliant.
see, that's a geezer mentality. I'm not gonna do a list this long. I'm gonna do a list this long. It's gonna take me 2 more hours, but it's gonna be this much better,
Yeah,
right? That's kind of a generational thing that there's a good example of it from a creative.
the commitment. Love it.
Yeah.
What gives you confidence?
I think you have to be comfortable in your own skin and know what you know and know what you don't know. Again, I think what gives me the most, I don't know that it gives me confidence, like being curious is confidence, right? Because you're not, insecurity breeds walls and fences and barriers, right? Confidence breeds curiosity and what have you. But what gives you confidence? I mean, I have to be honest, my parents, right, is what it is. It's hard to teach confidence. I think you can help young people become more confident or older people become more confident. I mean, I have friends of mine that are just innately insecure for whatever reason, but I think that's kind of deep seated. So I think it starts as youthful. And then I think that, the crowd you run with, the behaviors that you start embracing, and that's what leads you to this business, right? If you're that y- ad people can't be kept in a box. We can't be accountants. We wouldn't be good lawyers. We'd be terrible at anything repetitive. We just couldn't be. So I think that, but that's a big loaded question, but I do appreciate the question.
I think that brings us back as well to your point about mentorship and the fact that you can help young creatives come out of their shell and help their confidence and that sort of thing. And last time we spoke, I remember you saying mentorship has left the building.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? What's happened? What do we need to change?
There's no masters of their craft to teach the young people. And if there are, there's not enough of them. Right. So, like I said, I grew up in an era where people my age that were unbelievable creatives that were decorated and awarded were working with the young creatives to work on their craft and to help them become great. And there always were, and there still are, but they're all just young now. Like it used to be that senior creative team, and then that mentored the juniors, and that senior creative team got mentored by the ACDs, the associate creative directors, and then the creative directors mentored the ACDs, and the ECD mentored the CDs, right? And everything worked really nicely. And then you had the top to bottom interaction that was quite prevalent as well, where the ECD had to prioritize their time, but it was like, hey, there's this young hotshot team or teams that are killing it, right? They're doing such a great job. Well, now you get the ECD's time because these guys are developing quicker. And the system all worked really well together. But the mentorships left the building when you have one 52-year-old and then the next rung down are 31, and there's, God, at the big agencies, hundreds of them.
Yeah.
Right? But let alone 10, how do you get your job done if you're spread thin? And that's where I say that the business of the ad business and its unfortunate flawed business model in this present day has led it to a race to the bottom. And in the race to the bottom to make your numbers, the mentors have left the building and the young people are on their own to figure it out.
Following that structure that you mentioned there, and knowing your experience that you've had in advertising, like we said, for over 20 years now, you must have received some wisdom in that time. Is there any sort of advice that you've received from someone of a very different generation that's really stayed with you?
Yeah, and it was an older generation. It was a boomer generation, and it was stay humble, stay hungry.
And that you still follow that now?
Yeah, because you have to walk with enough swagger in this business and have that confidence that borderlines that you don't want to go arrogant. So if you're going to be hungry, you need to be humble, and that allows you to walk with a certain confidence and swagger that people gravitate towards. Right? I want to be in the room with the person, that's really hungry and getting after problems and getting after brilliant solutions to them, but is humble enough to sit with a group of people and make it about them and the team, as opposed to the individual, right?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, again, this is a business of egos. Like that's why I don't want to just gloss over that term, stay humble, stay hungry, because this is an ego driven business. There are a lot of talented people you can go to the arrogant side real quick when you're 23 years old out of the gates and you sold your first Super Bowl commercial when the two teams down the hall that have been there for 16 years have never gotten an idea even to the client presentation for Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Like that can go south in a hurry. Like that's like rich youth, right? I think we're dealing with that. Or, I remember saying like, well, of course Drew Barrymore turned into a nightmare. She had $50 million when she was 12.
It's not good
Like,
for you.
yeah, of course, or NFL athletes that are like, "Oh, I can't believe that guy got in trouble." What do you mean you can't even you gave him $100 million in a signing bonus. Th They just got out of school.
Yeah, we reward confidence and it can be misplaced, I suppose, then in
Yeah.
terms of ego. So What advice would you give somebody entering the industry now to a young ad creative? What would you say?
Find a mentor even if they're not in the building, right? So if your building doesn't have any mentors, that's another thing with Gen X. We like to give, right? So I have a lot of time for a lot of people that I've worked with, and I have a lot of time for somebody that sends me a note on LinkedIn and says, hey, weird request. I've been looking for somebody to speak with and haven't been able to find one, right? Good. You stroked my ego. Oh, I know something. But yeah, get a mentor even if they're not in the building and they're out there and they're willing to help. But yeah, first and foremost. And then you know what? Just stay crazy curious, right?
I love that. Are you a part of a mentoring network or program that we should know about?
You know what? I'm not. And that's an interesting question. And that's an interesting takeaway for me is to, hey, maybe that's something that we should do as Geezer. You always look for like, what's your cause? We have a big cause. I mean, we're cause based, right? We want to put every Geezer creative back to work one person at a time if we can. So that's the, the background of a nice cause behind us. But that's an interesting one. I'm going to actually bring that up to my partners and say, hey, why don't we start with all of these people? Like, if there's anything in starting this that has been overwhelmingly depressing yet positive, it's the outreach from the Geezers that are on the street that are like, thank you for doing something about this. Like, can we talk? We're spending a lot of time speaking with them, but to take that roster that we offer our clients and to turn it into a network of mentors is really interesting. So thanks for the question and the answer.
Absolutely. Let me know how I can help. I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
To finish, I'd love to, because you mentioned a few times geezology, and I can understand your kind of ethic and your approach and your attitude a little bit. But can you just finish by summarizing what is geezology? How can we have more of it?
It's funny. I mean, it actually, if you Google it, it is a thing, right? And you
Okay.
can go and you can read the definitions. But I mean, it's just, I think it's the word that it's like the name Geezer is just, we just took a negative when, and flipped it into something that we're going to empower ourselves with. And again, we don't have to go into race things, but we're not the first ones to do that either. And to take control of a name and a word, because when you were old Geezer, it was looked at poorly, and we want to turn that into a positive. But geezology is just like, there's actually, there's a definition behind it and a rationale behind it. And the word geezology is just freaking funny.
I love it.
Yeah.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight and your knowledge and your wisdom with me. As ever, a really fascinating chat, and I really appreciate it. So thank you, Brent.
Great. Yeah. Thank you very much. It's been a blast.